designed to do, you can start.
Sí.
Thank you. Okay, well, we've seen that the movement, the cultural movement known as the Renaissance, starts with this moment of enchantment. There is a sense of enchantment about being alive with other people who also are alive, about being alive in an environment that is hospitable, and discovering that people can love each other, that they can be creative, and that life is nice. Okay? That starts with this moment of enchantment. Then, over the course of about 300 years, there's a bit of we've seen that some of the same tropes come back. Like, this idea that it's from the classics that one learns how to enjoy existence because they provide a model. So the humanism starts, and then the same rhetoric, the same tropes, the same figures, right? The same ideas move along in the movement. We've seen that even Phaedra, when she tells about how she is agonizing for Hippolytus, she mentions Venus, the goddess of love. There's another point where Aphrodite is mentioned. So we see that's part of the same movement. But the movement changes, okay? So that when, instead of focusing on self-knowledge, it becomes focused on charting new territories, exploring, and getting to chart what is outside. Then it becomes a movement of expansion, and then it becomes a movement of domination. And so, there is this change to the control. It becomes more about control and not about enchantment. That sense of enchantment gets lost, and the control comes here. Or the fear of losing control, which is the same thing. Control becomes the focus in one way or another. Control especially of the other, of those who are different, okay? Or those who have evolved independently, like the indigenous population of the Americas that had evolved independently of Europe, Asia, and Africa for several thousand years, and also the biological system, the agricultural products, etc. So there's that fear of losing control and that preoccupation with controlling. Okay? And that's what we're going to see. What we're going to see is mainly European art. We're not going to see indigenous art. We're going to see how the same European art evolves from this point to the other, so that it gives us a sense of what the main preoccupation was and how it changed. You can move on to the next slide. So here we see the Mercator map, 1587. Already you see that the charting of the globe, of the planet, is quite advanced. If you consider that less than a century ago, they barely knew that there was something here, and they wasn't even sure that it wasn't this. Okay? So 1 century of this expansion is quite remarkable. Next. So then we've seen, well, for those of you who were with me in the past semester, that the Renaissance values and the medieval values, basically what was good in the Middle Ages was bad in the Renaissance, and vice versa. So in the Middle Ages, conformity was good, but in the Renaissance, individualism was good. Doctrine was good, realism was good, observation, fear of change, and activism. So we recapitulate that shift, that change. Next. Okay, and we see that, is this right? Yes, it is. In the architecture, this manifests with this medieval preoccupation with getting to heaven, the cathedral that tries to touch the sky, wherever is supposed to be the divinity, right? And then next, the light that filters that spiritual essence. Next, again, one more. background, the surroundings. It's a lot more round. It has more to do with the beauty of the female body. It imitates the curvaceousness of what makes women's bodies or female bodies or even male bodies attractive. Okay, next. And again, it's really focused more on the earth and not on the sky. Next. We see then that in secular life, the life that is not religious, every family tries to have the highest tower so that they can, you know, symbolize this way the domination, the preeminence, so that from, you know, a city where all the artisans work together, we get to of the Italian city-states initially. Then we get to where certain families really dominate the scene. And we see already that in Dangerous Beauty in Venice, that there are just a few families that basically decide what's going to happen. Next. Again, one of those piazzas where, market square of those times when again, the commerce and trade were flourishing again after the time of more fear, you know, more closed society of the Middle Ages. We also see in the gardens, okay, see, this is a very important phase, because you see the enchantment, right? But the enchantment with what is monstrous, okay? They're not looking for regularity, for symmetry, as you will see in Raphael. This is Proserpina, and this is the Agra. Proserpina, remember, is the daughter of Ceres, the goddess of the earth. So again, initially this very humanism is really enchanted with whatever comes, not exactly with what corresponds to a perfect beauty, okay? But all the traditions of the classical age enchant them. Next. And you also see how, again, what is odd, what is irregular becomes enchanting. Why? Because there's this desire for freedom. And freedom and symmetry don't always go along. Sometimes things are asymmetrical, because that's how nature is. Next. Okay. And then we see this attempt to really include everyone in this architectural form, right? This colonnade that's more like an embrace. Like if we can all, you know, be contained, then all these different impulses can still be together in the same place. Next. Okay. And then we have perhaps, you know, one of the symbols of this combination of enchantment of the Renaissance, which is, you know, this bringing together all these different skills that make the building of this cupola possible. And we know very well that the other side of this is that in Germany, the Protestants are getting annoyed that all their donations that they hope to save their souls with are, you know, getting deviated to Rome, so that Rome can be more beautiful, and their local communities become deprived. Next. Okay, another one. Okay, here we see how this enchanted moment really has to do with this being present to life. Not only we have one cupola here, but we have two. So we have that symmetry, and at the same time we have a lot of irregularity. Next. Okay. And then we get to the Baroque. The Baroque is a style that we don't touch a lot in our course, because we do more neoclassicism. But the Baroque is this excessive adornment. If you look at how the characters in Phaedra speak, they don't speak very simply. They speak with all these convolutions. Okay? They speak in a way, in a Baroque way, right? They complicate the way they communicate with a lot of things. And that's part of the Baroque. So the Baroque is also a way to follow the irregularities, but almost like emphasizing them. If you look at the Baroque, you can see it as a way to manifest that fear that control is impossible. So that instead of making lines simple, you try to follow all these irregularities. Next. Okay. So here we see, this is in Venice, it's the Islamic influence. Remember the Islamic art, for those of you in the previous course, it's really an art of decoration mostly. It's a bit like a lace, because in Islam, representation is forbidden. You can never represent any divine figure, nobody from the Quran, nothing. So it becomes an art that really focuses on representation. And we see, remember in Veronica, in Dangerous Beauty, the menace of the Turks, the Islamic people from the Eastern Mediterranean. You can see that not only they were a menace, but really in reality the Islamic world had a huge influence on culture and the arts throughout the early Renaissance, the Middle Ages, etc., because they were the ones that were expanding them. Next. Okay. And another example of Renaissance, Venice Renaissance architecture, you see again this lace, very decorative art. Next. Another example. See how Oriental, Arab, or Islamic this is, even though Venice was never an Islamic city, but the influence is there. Okay, next. And this is a painting of the 18th century of this hustle and bustle, what people do, the merchants, the artisans, the different people in the city that come and go, the activity of a high Renaissance city, as was seen by Canaletto, who lived actually in the 18th century, so a bit after. Yes. So we get to the French court of Versailles. So we see this, at the same time that the economy expands because of all the new products that come from these trade posts in India, in Indonesia, in the Caribbean, in Brazil, in southern states of the United States, then there are there's a new class of merchants and entrepreneurs that becomes very active and very important socially. They are the ones who are dynamic and expanding the economy. But then there is the aristocratic class that still has privilege politically. Remember, the merchants and the entrepreneurs don't count, because at that time, if you worked, you were considered lower class. The rich didn't work. They were aristocrats. They had fun. Okay? They lived off of the others. Okay? So the idea of a friend of Louis XIV is to say, okay, how can I help the merchants and the entrepreneurs do their job and have a more dynamic economy, more dynamic society, and get all these aristocrats off their backs? Well, I can call them all to my court in Versailles, and because they're parasites anyway, so at least I put them all together, and maybe they can do less damage that way. And that's how Versailles becomes the most luxurious court in Europe, and then all the other courts follow suit, and they do the same thing. Next. And here you have even wider painting where you see all this realm. Basically, was like an amusement park for the aristocracy. That they had everything they wanted, and all they had to do was really deal with each other. Next. Okay. So here is absolutism. This is a portrait of Louis XIV, the Sun King. And remember that he was not a bad absolutist king. At least he had a plan. And because he had a long term, he lived a long life, he provided a certain stability to the country. Okay, there was much worse. But look at how he had to affirm his power. This fur from Ermelino is a very, very expensive fur. I don't even know that there are any such animals anymore. It must be one of those species that become extinguished. Remember the fur trade from the northern North Americas, here where it ends up. Consider what it takes of slave labor, of traders and entrepreneurs and manufacturers and animals that are dead and indigenous people who are exterminated and people who are deported from Africa to get the king so attired, okay? And as we move on, you will see that basically a distinction between the aristocrats who didn't work and the entrepreneurs, the merchants, and the people who worked in the factories or in the fields was that the aristocrats wore this. Is called a culotte. Culotte also means underwear in French. It means panties. However, in this case, the culotte is the whole thing that covers the legs. Okay, whereas the people who work can't afford to be so attired. Do you think you could come to school dressed like this? Right? Okay. So the regular people who work, that includes everyone, that is not an aristocrat, they wear pantalones, okay? So in the French Revolution, they were called the sans-culottes, not because they didn't have any panties, but because they didn't have this kind of culotte that was used by the aristocrats who didn't work, okay? And you see how, in fact, there is a lot of effeminacy, we would say, in the way this king is dressed, right? Because, you know, that's part of the thing that these people didn't work. They had a life of leisure, okay? Next, they were the parasites. So, when you read Phaedra, you imagine the performances at that time in a stage like this, which, as you see, is all very baroquely adorned according to the time. It's neoclassical. It could look like a Greek or a Roman stage, but really it's a lot more adorned than anything you find in antiquity. And it's also, the characters would be here in front and they would just be talking to each other. There isn't a lot of action. These are basically courtiers, and they can only sit like this, like a little statue, because they can't move really. You know, they're not used to doing anything. All they do is they even have maids to dress them up because they can't even dress themselves up. It's just too much work. Okay, next. Okay, this is a very interesting picture because it shows you, when you study geometry, you study the Cartesian plan, right? 2-dimension or 3 dimensions. That's how you chart a flat surface. You measure the length, the width, you measure the length, and it's basically Euclidean geometry with 3 dimensions. And so that's called a Cartesian plan, like to graph things out, etc. So Cartesian, this word comes from Descartes. Descartes was a philosopher, very important philosopher in the 16th century. And, no, in the 17th century, I'm sorry. Contemporary of Racine, the author of Phaedra, contemporary of Pascal, who was also a Jansenist like Racine. Okay, so, but Descartes went along with the system a lot more. That's why I don't like it, to be honest with you. I can respect him, but I don't see why to model that age or what mattered at that age, we should focus on Descartes. Descartes didn't believe that animals felt pain. I disagree. And he divided the world in res cogitans, the thing that thinks, and res extensa, the thing that is just extended. And then he attributed a special relation to the divine to the mind. Okay? So everything that was a mind, and remember that for him only humans had minds. I disagree with that too. Languages, there are animals, species that have languages. My dog had a mind when he was alive, I can be certain of that. So then for him, everything, or at least for the rationalistic philosophy that he represents, everything is resources. that humans can chart and control and use for them. Can you see that? This is nature according to Descartes. Can you see it? It's all geometrical forms. It's all really charted and controlled. This, you know, is just for humans to admire how much they can control it. But where is nature? Per se. Okay? So this is a little bit what Racine was attacking in his jabs, because that play is not, you know, it's not really nice to Louis XIV. You are blind, you can't tell right from wrong, right? Okay, so this is the world that Racine lived in and that he criticized as a Jansenist. And remember, his main influence was Pascal. And Pascal was a probabilist. He studied the theory of probability, and he was a mathematician. But he disagreed with Descartes. He said, true, we live in the era of rationalism where we want to control everything, and every land, every people, every expanse of nature is something we can use. However, he said, le cœur a des raisons que la raison ne connaît pas. The heart has some reasons that reason does not know. And remember what Théramen tells Hippolyte, you can't resolve this with reason. You are in love. There's no reason about love. It's another form of reason that is more powerful. And we see that with Phaedra and Hippolyte. We see that nobody, you know, it doesn't matter who tells her, look, this is suicidal, this passion is suicidal. She still feels it. Okay? So that we can imagine that this be an illusion. Can we really chart the entire planet and reduce it to a French garden? Including the jungle? Including the Amazon? Can we do that? Okay. Next. Okay, another example of this style. Next. And this is another, just to give you also, it's pretty. Okay. So then we go back to our, you know, first encounter with this idea of the energy of love as what moves the world, right? With amor, which is Dante, where he says that amor is really what moves the cosmos. But then it creates all these problems because people start loving each other, and what is going to happen to that? So here is the second circle, where we find Paolo and Francesca, as you remember. And here is the circle of the ninth circle, where the murderers are. And here's where the eighth circle is where the sodomites are. So remember that again, this recuperation of love in its infinite forms of manifestation is very partial in the Renaissance, even at its best, because again, for the antiquity, all kinds of sexual expression were accepted, but in Christianity, certain kinds are considered so unnatural that only murders are worse than that. Next. Okay, and this is the image of Dante, just to document the way he looked. Next. Okay, and then the courtly love. This is a medieval illustration of courtly love. We've seen that, you know, this was between people of the nobility, and that it helped them become a little nicer, and therefore it was tolerated even though it was outside of marriage and illegal. Next. This is a representation of Paolo kissing Francesca. Remember that this kiss caused him eternal damnation according to Dante. And this would be her husband lurking behind and eventually killing them. Okay, next. And this is another representation. This is Frederick Leighton, who is actually, for those of you who went to the Pre-Raphaelite exhibit in Ponce, the Pre-Raphaelite school is a school of painting of England in the late 19th century, and Frederick Leighton is one of them, a very good painter in that group. Okay, so this is much later. So we see that this observation of the enchantment starts even before humanism. they don't have to study the classic to find out how beauty in nature is. How beautiful. See, Virgin is very pretty. The angel. There's something very magical about how they're represented. Next. And another example. Next. Okay, this is various versions by the same painter, by the way. Okay? And a little detail. Can you see that the observation of the person? This is not just a mask. It's an individual person with an expression. It's a moment of life, of this enchanted life. Next. Okay. And then, again, you know, the observation of common people. This is, of course, a biblical theme, but then the people are people of that time with their characteristics and with their specificity. Another moment of attention to embodied existence. Next. And then looking at the detail, you know, how are these cities built? What happens in the sky? And what is the perspective? How do we really see things in perspective? You know, how to create the illusion of distance using certain techniques of painting. Yes. And more of that. You see that observation of the activity in the cities. People are doing this and that. They're getting together. Somebody is preaching. Next. Okay. So here is the important theme, the universal judgment. We know that, you know, this sort of rebirth happens within a framework of Christianity. And Christianity has certain doctrines now, is an established, institutionalized religion, and you have to be careful to respect what you're supposed to believe, the doctrines. And so the universal judgment is really an important theme because it would be this time when all the souls that have died over time, of the people who have died over time, all the souls that are eternal and don't reincarnate, because Christianity never really talks about reincarnation. The Greeks believed in reincarnation. Hinduism believes in reincarnation, but not Christianity. That they come before Jesus and they are judged for, that's the ultimate judgment. There's a judgment the minute you die, but then there is that final ultimate judgment. Next. And okay, before you go next. So look at this, and this is the early, it's enchanted period, is a universal judgment theme from Frangelico, who really represents this enchantment. Look at how beautiful and magical it is. There is no sense of torment, no sense of conflict. Next. Okay. Then we have the movement of humanism that becomes part of it. Okay. So here we have a classical painting of Venus born from the waters according to the Greek legends. And this was found later in Pompeii. So it's a Roman imitation of a Greek theme. But that's the theme, is that out of the waters is born this goddess of love. And this has a lot to do with the relationship with water, with the planet. The female body is always full of water. Remember, there is a lot of fluidity in the female body because otherwise children can't be born. Right? There is all the breastfeeding, etc. So Aphrodite really brings all that together. Yes. Okay. And here we have those painters like Botticelli, for example, who really capture this enchanted moment. They say, what if it were true that this, you know, young woman was born who represents love, or what is lovable, what we imagine as love, comes out of the waters, and there are the winds blowing, there's the spring spreading her all with flowers. So you see how humanism really becomes a reference for these painters who want to capture this enchantment. And we go to next. Okay, we have a detail. Look at how androgynous this woman is. She's not hyper-feminine. She's quite, you know, in between male and female. She's clearly connoted as female, but it's not like she's hyper-feminized. Next. And more detail even. Okay, and this is another very important painting. And when I teach the poem of Laura, Petrarca's poem, where he sees this place where he saw Laura at one point, but then she's gone and blah blah, and there is that memory of that rain of flowers when she was sitting on near the tree. This is really the reference. Okay, this is this spring, primavera. No, this is, right? This woman with a cornucopia of flowers who showers people with flowers, and then this moment of enchantment of nature when at the spring, the nature is reborn. The three great graces, these three women who dance together, which is also classical mythology part. So this is really a painting that's very symbolic of this enchanted moment. Again, they don't look at the storm, they don't look at the winter, they don't look at the hurricane, they look at this moment of rebirth. Next. Okay, and here you see the symbolism of all the flowers. She looks a bit like Laura. She has these trenzas blondas, and it represents that ideal. She's also very androgynous. Look at her. She's really almost a hermaphrodite in the way she looks at as well. Next. And this is another detail, the three graces. Next. And another detail, always from the same painting. Okay. And here we see a little more of humanism. You see that here Botticelli tries his hand at Venus and Mars. These are two classical deities. God of war, the goddess of love. Next. Okay. And of course you see that humanism in the way this Mars, even in the way he is positioned, very languorous, very languid, very sensual, has to, inspired by these classical Greek statues of Apollos. Remember Apollo, the god of poetry, the one that Veronica Franco refers to. He's male, but he is very artistic, he's very sensuous, he's very receptive. Okay, he's not classical, a hyper-masculine male. Next. Okay, and then we get to also the Reformation that has an influence on art. So here we see that the painters are free now, affirm their freedom. Culture is affirming its freedom from the doctrine. All of a sudden, people can read the Bible. They don't have to listen to what the priest says about the Bible. Okay? The direct access to the scripture is really one of the characteristics of the Reformation. So in the scripture, of course, there's the story of Adam and Eve and the temptation. So they start painting. They start really making paintings out of things that come from the Bible. And because in the Bible they were naked, they make them naked. Okay? So there is that rediscovery of the self as a full human being with a body that is alive. Okay, next. And you see that there they were separated in two different paintings. They were related. Here they can't touch each other. So that's some progress. They've lost some of the fear of locking them up. Next. Okay, and here they're doing even more. Okay, next. And we see that basically the same techniques are also applied to mythological figures. So we see that for many painters of the Renaissance, both the Bible, Christian scripture, and Greek mythology are sources of tropes for paintings. They don't really look at one as religion and the other one as mythology. They simply look at them as sources for inspiration. Yes. Okay. And again, another, here it's even more sensuous. They are separated, but it's more sensuous if you look at it. This is all from the area of the Hanseatic League. Remember, it's another area of early Renaissance, the cities of Holland that are also independent and that have many artists. Next. Okay, here, another effect of the Reformation is that people start saying, hey, why don't we keep our resources here and start celebrating our own lives and our own community instead of being drained with the excuse of these pardons that may be totally fictitious from, the Vatican and losing our resources to the central power. And so there is this tradition of the kermesse, which is a feast, a party for the people. They do different foods, they play the music, they all participate, they had fun, so that these special times of years, especially carnivals, for example, which is precisely our time now, the 21st is the last day of Carnival, There are special times that are dedicated to this communal feasting. Next. And here's another one. You see that they get a little drunk and they dance. This was recuperation of this joy of being together, being alive, being a little excessive at times. Next. And of course, a very important theme is the Tower of Babel, that in the Old Testament is mentioned as this place of all vices, of all corruption. Okay, it's kind of fascinating theme. Next. Okay, and here you see even more of this time when people really unleash, when they become wild, when everything is allowed. Especially this is the carnival. See, before Lent, the 4 days of fasting and prayer before Easter, right? Then before Lent starts, there is this moment of excess and festivity and really being a bit wild. That applies to everyone. You don't have to be rich to do this, to deserve this time of feasting. Next. And another one still. See people dancing, recuperating some of those traditions that even preceded Christianity at times, as we've seen in Midsummer Night's Dream, where they talk about the elves and those Celtic traditions. Next. Okay. So here we have still life. Again, still life is an interesting term because it has to do with the idea that it's the object that is being painted is something that is alive, like a flower. Okay, but then it's still, because it's not a human being. It's, it stays where you put them. Okay, so it's life, but then it's part of what humans consider something that belongs to us and that we can control. If we cut the flowers and we put them here, they're going to stay. Okay, so and then it's really a celebration of the complexity of it, of the colors. Okay, and it's a very common trope, especially in the Flemish school. Remember, when you talk about Flemish school, you're talking about the Netherlands, the Hanseatic League, as your book calls it. Next. So here we come to what is known as the High Renaissance. Some people see these movements as things that start small, and then they develop, then they have a sort of climax, and then they kind of, either they degenerate, or they become something else, or they dissipate, they become less relevant. Okay, so this would be the High Renaissance, or the highest moment. And you see all the different elements of the Renaissance. First, the observation. Look at the perfect perspective of this painting. This is almost like an architectural study in 3 dimensions. This is a vanishing point, so that there's a central vanishing point and all the lines converge into the same vanishing point, so that it gives a sense of distance. The architectural structure is round. Remember, the Renaissance really likes things that are round. Why? Because we are round, because nature is round, because nature is not square. There are no rectangles out there in a natural garden. Okay, so these round forms, okay, and then the way people are dressed models the kind of luxury, not excessive, but certainly distinction and wealth of the new classes, the new entrepreneurial and mercantile classes, and the theme is biblical. This is the wedding of Mary. But we know very well that Mary wasn't dressed like this. She definitely didn't have these kinds of clothing. She was a very poor woman in Palestine. She didn't even have a place to give birth. So, it's an embellishment of these Old Testament legends in a context that is typical of the Renaissance. Look also at this perfect, geometrical shape that frames the whole painting. And this is Raphael. The name to remember is Raphael, who's really considered the climax, the high point of the Renaissance. Okay, next. Again, This is a biblical theme. This is Mary, Mary, the Mother of Jesus, and you see that she's dressed like a quite a fluent Renaissance woman. She has the complexion and the kind of hair and characteristics of Laura, of Petrarch,